There- Yep, my mic works. You guys all ready to bow down to our AI overlords today? Um, uh, welcome to this stream. Um, I'm in a bit of a funny mood. I'm getting over a bit of a cold, um, so we'll see how things go. But um, I didn't want to miss streaming today. I was debating it last night. I wasn't feeling that great last night. This morning I woke up and I was like, you know what? I just want to I want to be a developer today. I want to write some code. I want to look at some code. Um, if you guys don't know, in my day-to-day job, I've transitioned more from kind of from a staff engineer over to more of an architect. Um, my current work right now is very high level. And so I spend a lot of time writing, decision records and um, things like that. So I highly value the time that I get to write code. Um, so very much looking forward to today. Um, uh, hey, Ole, welcome to the stream, man. Good to have you here. Um, but yeah, we've been talking about AI for a bit. Um, and last week, I decided to merge in a lot of the changes that we've been making because we had a branch. We can go take a look at this. Um, so let's get this closed. But I mean, we had a branch that was running since July 27th. We've been having a lot of long running branches in here. Um, and because of these long running branches, I haven't been having as many PRs go up and things like that. Um, last Sunday, I merged in this branch, and when I merged it in, I've got I've got my the workspace for Tour of Heroes set up so that it will run Gemini Code Assist against the PRs and generate information. It's been doing that for a while. Um, and this is this is where I think AI has a lot of potential to be very useful. It's in this agentic type stuff, right? Um, one of the things that you'll find, and I even do this sometimes myself, um, you'll get to this point where there's like PR fatigue, right? Where you're just getting so many PRs that you hit the places where you figure there's the most chance for mistakes. And a lot of times, other parts of the PR will slip through. This is the reason why I push for smaller PRs when people are doing PRs. When you push large PRs in, what you're really doing is you're increasing the likelihood of PR fatigue setting in, especially when you've got other engineers on your team who every hour they take to review your PRs is an hour that they can't review their own, or that they can't be working on their own tickets and things like that, right? And so there's kind of this stress that happens with PRs naturally. Um, and then if there are people who are dedicated just to doing PRs, they get tired of it, right? So really, really long PRs are just a good way to get code through that probably shouldn't go through. Um, big PR. Yep, Michael, you are 100% correct. A small PR, you're going to have tons of comments, everybody arguing over the naming of a variable, right? And that's the other side of things, right? Um, welcome to the stream, by the way. But you're 100% correct, right? The smaller your PRs are, the more comments you're going to get. And sometimes the more nitpicky those comments are. A giant, giant PR, like you said, zero comments. And it's really, really weird because you would expect if you got 100 comments on, 10 lines of code, um, your giant PR, you should have millions of comments, but who knows? Um, yeah, it comes down to human nature, right? We get tired, we get bored. Um, there's just a lot going on in PRs, and it's a really heavy cognitive load a lot of times for people, because not only are you trying to understand new code, right? Understand the way somebody else writes code, which is a big, like, this is a big plus. Whether you love or hate linters, linters are a way of enforcing that your code looks the same. Um, and, a good portion of our days are spent reviewing PRs. And if the code doesn't look the same, then basically the person doing your review needs to learn your coding style, needs to learn all these other things, and it becomes more difficult for them, right? And if your variables are named differently, and like, all the little tiny inconsistencies add up in the cognitive overhead that somebody has to maintain. Along with that, they've got to also think about the overall structure of the project, the overall goal of the ticket, that right, is this PR. There's just a whole lot of cognitive overhead. Reviewing PRs is often a much more mentally taxing task than actually creating the code, right? Because when you're creating the code, you're in there, you understand what's going on, you know everything about what you need to know. When somebody comes along to review it, they've got to figure out all of that context, and then figure out how that context works within the overall project, and then figure out how that works within the consistency rules that you've established as an organization, and then figure out, hey, does this even make sense? And, right, there's just a whole bunch more there. um, this is a big long-winded preamble to say AI is really, really good at taking a ton of text, um, getting context out of that text, and um, and analyzing that text, right? That's where LLMs really, really shine. And the reason for that is just the way they're built, right? With all of the different vectors, and all of that stuff makes it really, really easy for AI to generate summaries of text and to analyze text and things like that. Same with images and videos. AI is really, really good at analyzing those. Um, and In my day to day, I use AI quite heavily, um, but not in the ways that you might expect. Um, One of the big things I do is I keep a ton of notes in Obsidian in my day to day work. Right, whenever I'm in a meeting, I'm taking notes in Obsidian. Whenever I have an idea, I'm taking notes in Obsidian. Whenever I read something, I'm taking notes in Obsidian. Um, and then what I can do is I can feed those notes into, we use Copilot at work. And so I feed those notes into Copilot, um, and I just say, hey, maybe I've got a meeting coming up with somebody at work. And it's like, hey, what do I need to remember to prepare for this meeting? So, a half hour before the meeting, I feed Copilot my notes, say, hey, I'm having a meeting with so and so. What do I need to remember from my notes to prepare for this meeting? Copilot, in 30 seconds, scans through all my notes, spits out a checklist, and I can prepare for the meeting and be ready, for the meeting when it shows up. Um, or I've got like a bullet point from meeting notes. Hey, we need to schedule a meeting with so and so, so and so, so and so. I was like, based on my notes, can you prepare an agenda for a meeting that I need to schedule with these people? And the AI is a huge help there. Um, yeah, GPT-5. I mean, AI struggles with a bunch of stuff, right? But where it really shines through is just summarizing things. And one of the places where I think it really shines through is in PRs. So we're gonna go take a look at some PRs, because it surprised me how well Gemini understood the PRs. Um, but then it also surprised me some of the comments that came back, because part of that was like, oh, did I really do that? And part of it was like, oh, come on now, come on, I'm better than that, right? Don't tell me to do that. Like, a lot of the feelings that come back through, as you're doing, PRs, I still get a lot of those feelings. I tell everybody, you'll start to really improve as a developer once you realize that you are not your code. And I try to live that, but there's sometimes where people make comments about my code, and I'm like, dude, do you even understand what you're saying and what's written? And right, so I'm still working on getting over that. Um, One thing I would like to take a look at, right, as we talk about how type, um, agentic type AI assistants are a huge help. This morning, Warp updated and it popped up immediately. Warp is big into agentic flows and AIs, right? And if you guys don't know, I'm not sponsored by Warp. I use the Warp terminal. I actually don't have a pro account. I'm debating paying for a pro account to get more AI time. Um, but Warp doesn't sponsor me. I just really like this terminal, and so I did want to call that out. This is something that I enjoy. It's not, I'm not being sponsored here. Um, Actually, I don't have any sponsors, so anything I talk about, I'm not being sponsored by anybody. Uh, I guess the closest I've got to being sponsored is the JetBrains stuff. Um, they provide their stuff for free, but it has nothing to do with me being a streamer, and it's more me being a GDE. Um, and so yeah, like I use WebStorm, I use a bunch of JetBrains tools, but even before I was getting their stuff for free, I was paying for their full suite of tools. I just really like the JetBrains tools. Anyway, Warp generated this Warp MD file, right? Says it's to provide guidance to Warp, but as I was reading through it, it was a really good example of why AI is so good at summarizing text, right? Because if we look at the source code for this application, it's just text. It's not until it's transpiled down to ECMAScript, and then from there it's transpiled it's compiled, right? It's JITted into the machine code that's used in the browser. That it's actually instructions for the for the browser or whatever. But anyway, it's text, and so regardless of how terse the text is or whatever, an AI is really really good at analyzing that and then implementing stuff that's easier for humans to understand. So I expected this file to be um, a little bit more instructional, but it's actually a really good overview, right? So it's a modern Angular 20 plus application. Great. Thank you for telling me it's modern. I feel good here, right? We're using the NX monorepo framework. Absolutely. Implementing a Tour of Heroes demo using the latest Angular features. Um, and it's interesting that it figured out that this is the classic Tour of Heroes. And it lists out the features, right? Standalone components, signals, NGRX signal store. And then this project demonstrates a clean architectural separation between application code, shared UI components, and state management. Thank you so much, AI. I love this. Right? AI, the thing I like about AI is that quite often it's good at making you feel good about yourself. This is awesome. This makes me feel good, right? This is clean architectural separation of concerns and everything like that, right? Love it. And then it goes into the monorepo structure, right? So it breaks things out. This is the main application with SSR support. We've got our playwright E2E tests, so we haven't done anything with. This is the shared UI components and presentational logic, and then the state management stores and models using NGRX signal store. And we can go take a look at this. If we do pnpm exec nx graph, so we've got this layout that is showing. But not only can we show that, but we can take a look at the graph itself. So let's bring that up over here. And then we'll show all projects. And we can see we intentionally made this decision um, because we wanted to we wanted to show, you know, that state can live outside of UI. This was the circular dependency stuff that we talked about. One of the things I almost always do as soon as I start up NX is it not going to let me do it? Oh, so usually you had to left click to get things to. Now you can right click and exclude. So um, so now I almost always exclude the E to E stuff, right? And quite often I'll go in here and I'll increase the active proximity to 2 or 3 just to see if we're hiding any circular references. This project's so small and simple that there really aren't any circular references. What's a composite graph? Oh, very cool. I like that. I really like this composite graph. It shows where things live. So we've got in Tour of Heroes, we've got these apps, and they depend on. That's kind of cool. Um, oh, I mean, the other way to do it is you could actually come down here and you could start with Tour of Heroes, right? As soon as you click this, then it's going to show. Let's focus on this library. And you know, you can turn the stuff on and off also here. In the EDE projects, but there's not a lot here. But the reason we were looking at this is that it does show we've got the main app, right? And if we turn this on, we've got our playwright stuff, we've got our main app, we've got the UI library and the state library. And yeah, it's totally correct about that, which is cool, right? So that's our structure. Our state management is using NGRX Signal Store, which is correct. Tour of Heroes state contains the message store, which does the application-wide messaging. And if we serve this again, we can verify this by pulling open our Angular tab, right? And from here, we can go to the injector tree, which we've used a bunch, and we can look at what's injected where, right? So we've got a signal store here. And the other place, this is our message component that's injected at the, no, it's not. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Our message component is injected at the app component because the heroes component relies on it, right? We don't inject anything at this level. The message component doesn't inject anything, and we're going to be working with the router outlet soon. So we can verify what it's saying here by looking at our application and looking at the injectors. So yeah, we're using the message store for application-wide messaging. That's totally correct. The Tour of Heroes UI contains the hero store for hero management with immutable updates via mutative, which is really cool that it picked that up, right? Granted, the imports show you that we're using mutative and things like that, right? But then it talks about event-driven communication between stores using NGRX signal event. And that was what we added last week. And that's something that I do want to dig into today because Gemini called it out. And I don't want to spoil it too much, but Gemini was a bit harsh on us over this one. Well, me specifically, right? I made the decisions, I wrote the code. And then it calls out the technologies, right? We're using Angular 20. We're using standalone component signals. and control flow syntax, at if and at for, totally correct. NX21 plus, monorepo tooling, project management, and task execution, correct. And GRX signal store, modern state management with signals, correct. Tailwind CSS and Daisy UI. This is really, really cool that it figured out we're using Tailwind and Daisy. And we're using utility classes and component libraries, right? Utility classes from Tailwind and component libraries from Daisy UI. Jest, Playwright, PNPM. We haven't used anything from NG primitives yet. And so that's why I'm willing to bet it's not listed here. Even though the package is in our package JSON, it then goes through some development. So it shows how to use NX using NPX. You could use PNPX. You could use PNPM exec. PNPM exec. The reason I use that is that I struggle to use PNPX on Windows, and I'm not sure if it's the way I've got my environment set up or what. So I use PNPM exec. They're using NPX. NX will pick up the fact that you're using PNPM, so the NPX like this is totally fine. And these commands are all correct. The linting commands. I never use the prettier formatting, stuff like that. But this is really, really cool that it's telling you, you can use npx nx affected. That's useful in the CI. And again, this stuff is for Warp to do stuff, help us with, right? And then project management, we just showed the graph. And you can show the tasks in the tour of heroes, and list all the projects. These commands are all really, really useful. I think it's really cool that they're here. And then how to generate Angular components, which is cool. And then I've never done serve static. I've always just used serve. I'm curious, does that command work and what does it do? Come on. Hello? That was weird. So if we do PNPM exec nx serve static tour of heroes. I've never done a static serve. Okay. Yeah. Wait, no. Why is my NX daemon not enabled? Very fascinating. Do we get this up here as serve? No. It keeps telling me that my NX daemon is not enabled. So serve static. Oh, serve static goes through the actual full build, creates the chunks, and then serves from the static chunks. Whereas serve static is a way to set up a web server that's going to serve out of your dist folder. I've never used this. I've always just used serve because, and I want to use Vite and I want to use all of that stuff, right? So we're available on 4200. So if we refresh this, we should see that everything's fine. Unreachable code after return statement. Interesting. I'm not sure what the unreachable code is, but this is tanking the performance on my machine. I'm not sure what's going on there. But if we take a look here, everything should work just as it was before. Right. So, and if we look, we've got all of our messages here. If we hit test a bunch of times, we see that we're getting the hero selected here, but we only get test once. And that's an important piece. That another quick preview into something we're going to be talking about later today. So serve static, basically a static web server. That makes sense. So I've never actually used that. I've always used serve because I like Vite. I like the JITted stuff and things like that. And the hot swapping and all of that stuff. If you do a serve static, then it's going to have to run a full compile. Well, it's going to have to run an affected compile. The interesting thing here is we're at like 284K for our main and 46K for our styles. We're pretty big. Granted, we're using Tailwind. We probably aren't shaking out everything. Daisy's probably adding a bunch, right? Our server side chunks are a little bit big. Like we're closing in on, well, we're over a meg here, but that's fine because it stays on the server. These aren't sent across, right? And then these chunks can be lazy loaded. Then we've got 2 lazy chunks that can be sent to the browser. And so, at some point we can take a look at, can we make these bundles better? Like, I'm not as concerned about server bundles. Storage is pretty free. And, the server will scale just fine. Granted, I probably don't want these into like the 10 to 20 megabyte range. That's probably overkill. But for these sizes, I'm perfectly fine with it. But I would like to see if I can get these chunks smaller, and I think it's possible. But that's something we can explore in the future. Anyway, we've been able to verify, some of the commands that it added. So it chose to do serve static. That's fine. I would prefer serve, but that works. And then the architecture, right? The Serve Heroes UI contains UI components following a container presentational pattern. And this is a pattern that I follow quite regularly. I like the container presentation pattern, right? Some people call this the smart dumb. There are a bunch of different names for this pattern. And instead of circling it, right, I can underline it here, right? So this is a pretty common pattern. It's one of my favorites. So the hero component is the main container, and I like that it says that it's orchestrating the hero list and detail views. It is the orchestration component. And it's interesting. I've worked at a bunch of different companies over the years. Almost everybody thinks that they're really onto something as soon as they start talking about orchestration and orchestrating. It's a pretty common problem. But the heroes list component displays a selectable list of heroes. That's true. And the heroes detail component shows and edits selected hero details. Yep. And the message component displays system messages. This is all correct. Then the state library, the message store, global message logging with event-driven updates. This is totally correct. We are using the NGRX signal store to do our state management. The hero store, hero data management with immutable state updates. Very, very cool that it picked up that we want immutable state updates. And models and utilities for type safe state operations, totally correct. And then it picks up, right, we've got TOH state and TOH UI. These are in the tsconfig.base that make for easier imports. And then this was really cool. The store uses with immutable state and mutative for safe state updates. Like, this is where the understanding of an agent is huge, right? Because if I'm going through something, if I could read this kind of an overview over my library, I know over the application that I'm looking at, I know a lot about the application just because of what's going on here, right? Event-driven communication between stores using inject dispatch, right? So I may not understand what this means, right? I may not understand what it means by event-driven communication between stores using inject dispatch, but what it does mean is I can go, hey, what does this mean? And we can go find inject dispatch in here. Okay, so that's coming from NGR signals events. So I can go take a look at my message dispatcher. And let's make this bigger so that we can see it, right? So, oh, there's a dispatcher here using inject dispatch using message state events. I still don't understand what this means. So then I can go to NGRX and I can look for inject dispatch, right? So I can go to my browser. And I forget, is this my NGRX one? No, that's Angular. I've got the same tab open in multiple places. That's awesome. There we go. So I can go here and I can go inject dispatch and that's interesting. So the control K didn't work or command K or whatever you're using, right? But here I can go look up inject dispatch and it'll give me information and so I can dig into it deeper. This is where I think the benefit of like agentic flows is really, really gonna shine because it can pull out key concepts. Like I may not know what with immutable state is or mutative or inject dispatch, but they're highlighted in such a way that I can look for them in the code. If I can't understand them from the code, then I can go and look them up on the sites where they're used, right? We're using computed signals for derived state calculations. That's correct. RxJS methods, Rx method for handling async operations with debouncing. This is really, really cool that it picked up that we added this specifically for the debouncing. And granted, it's right there in the Rx method that we created with the pipe and all of that we do the debounce. But having this called out, one, it helps me as I'm looking at the overview of this project, right? If I think about this from the point of view of, hey, I'm a developer. I don't understand this project. Can you give me an overview? If I got this overview from anybody, I would be head over heels, right? Like this overview, I like to say, it speaks my love language, right? This is exactly the way I want to be talked to. I love it. And so these, like this section right here is amazing. And then the component pattern, right? Standalone components with explicit imports. Okay. That means that we aren't doing implicit imports, so we aren't doing export on our components. So it called that out, which was cool. It's picking up that we're using on push change detection. But it's saying for optimal performance. This is awesome. I love it. On push change detection for optimal performance. Great. I'm working optimally. I could send this summary over to my boss and be like, check out what the AI said about my code. Right? Signal-based reactivity throughout the application. And that this is key. If you want applications that your users are going to love, we need, this is a keyword here, reactivity. Signal-based is less important than the reactivity. Reactivity means that our component is reacting to what users are doing. It's reacting to change in state, right? It's reacting to events. Another way we could talk about this is we could call it event driven, right? I was going to try and write that out. right? It's tough to write with a mouse. I'm actually pretty, this is better than my own handwriting. So I'm very proud of this. Uh, but event driven is what we're talking about when we're talking about reactivity. We're responding to events that happen in the application rather than telling the application that, when this button is clicked, do this. We instead have that button cause an event, and then other parts of the application respond to that event. They in turn can raise events that maybe the UI responds to, that maybe some other piece responds to. Um, but that's the big piece that we've got here, right? Is we're event driven. Oh no, am I getting? You guys can hear me, right? Because the message I just got from Streamlabs is that my microphone's unmuted, but it's getting no signal. I can see the signal here in my mixer. Um, and I'm not seeing anybody like, hey, you're talking, but we can't hear you. So we're gonna plow through. That's a concerning message to get. Um, but yeah, signal-based reactivity throughout the application. This is a this is high praise for me personally. And any application that does reactivity throughout the application, and like I don't care if it's observable based or signal based. Well, technically I do. I think that there are times for signals. I think there are times for observables, things like that. And Daisy UI component classes for consistent styling. That's really cool. And then the testing stuff, I don't care about as much. But the testing stuff is right also, right? Jest, Playwright, component tests, use testbed with standalone component imports. Um, so a lot of good feedback here from our AI agent, um, which is huge. And this is where I think AI is helping us as developers, and as engineers and as architects, right? Being able to point AI at a code base and say, hey, what is this code base about? And to get back a concise, bulleted code base, like summary like that, is huge. Um, well worth allowing the AI to take a look over your code. Um, and it's actually something that, Monday morning in my meeting, I'm gonna go show them this file and be like, we should be generating stuff like this for our code bases. It's gonna help everybody. Um, so really, really impressed by that. Um, the next, and this, when I talk about AI, right? AI is doing some things way better than humans could ever do them. And summarizing is one place where AI is just miles ahead of humans. Um, we just don't have the capacity to hold all of those things in our brain and put them together coherently and things like that. And maybe some humans do. I don't, right? Um, and that's why I use AI quite heavily throughout the day to summarize my notes, and to give me information based on information that I've taken, or right. I was looking at the CISA. They have a document. It's 24 pages long, 24-page PDF, on how to implement zero trust environments. So if you guys want to read between the lines, I'm working on security right now at work. And this paper is pretty dense, pretty technical, right? And it's something that I could read through. Um, and I am reading through it. But when I read through a dense technical document like that, 24 pages, I'll probably make it through like 4 or 5 pages in an hour. So that document's probably going to take me 5 hours to go through and take my notes and understand it and things like that. To kind of short circuit that time, I fed the document into Copilot, right? The PDF straight into Copilot, and I said, "Hey, can you summarize this for me?" And it gave me some good points and some things that I went and looked up and understood. And then I said, "Hey, this is my current focus. What key points should I hit on in this document for that focus?" And it was able to summarize those key points and give me ideas of where to spend my time focusing. Um, so, right, it took probably 30 seconds for Copilot to spit that information back. It took me maybe an hour to go do the research that it suggested. And then I was able to make it through the document in about 2 hours, right? Because I was prepared. I knew what sections I cared about and things like that. And it made my job easier. So the total time went from 5 to 6 hours down to 3 hours, which basically doubled my productivity, is the way I would put it. Um, and that's the benefit of AI as I see it today. Code generation, AI produces code generation at the same level as a junior developer in most cases, and so like context aware code completion I love, and there's a bunch of other stuff, but when it comes to actually generating code, it, it's still not there for me yet, right? It does some things well. It does boilerplate well. It does unit testing well. Like unit testing is where AIs are invaluable to me. Um, but where it becomes super valuable is when it's summarizing code and things like that, right? Big, huge, long wind up to where we're heading. Walker, Minnesota, getting like one packet a minute, so I can't hear anything. But have a good stream. Hey man, thanks for even just checking in. Um, I'm glad to see you today, Michael. You can catch the replay, right? But this has been a bit of a wind up to get to where we're headed today. Um, I don't like AI generating code because then I feel unattached and disoriented. And this is the other. Who was I? Who was I? I was listening to somebody or talking with somebody, and I can't remember exactly who. But they were talking about um, who owns the code, right? And so when I write the code, I own the code. And when it goes to a PR, that's my code that's being reviewed. When you generate code, and then I put that generated code up for a PR, that generated code is not my code. If I didn't review that code and I didn't understand that code, then that code is going up in my name, but it wasn't written by me. And that's a big problem. And I think that's the disconnect you might be talking about, Johanderson, where when I'm writing code with an AI, and I don't do a lot of vibe coding, mainly because I don't need to. I will do some vibe coding if I've got a bunch of boilerplate or stuff like that I want the AI to throw together that I just don't feel like writing. But even in that case, I treat the AI more like a pair programmer and more like an overeager junior developer than I do treat it like, hey, this thing knows more than me. If I ever feel like the AI knows more than me, it's time for me to hit the books and understand what the AI is generating. Um, and that may change in the future. Like it may be that AIs eventually get to the point where they're generating code that is well above what a seasoned engineer can do. That's entirely possible. I don't know. But as it stands right now, I totally agree with you that there's a disconnect when the AI is generating code. and it turns into more of a peer review session, right? A PR type session where the AI generates code, and now I have to understand the context. And the problem is the AI may get the wrong context, right? It may not grab enough context to understand it. Who knows? Um, and so it switches to a very much more mentally heavy task than actually writing the code, if that makes sense. Like you can't enter into the flow state by having AI generate code for you. That's another interesting point that I hadn't considered. Um, Flow state is very real, and there's tons of scientific documentation around it. I know, I know when I'm in the flow state. Um, Only once I'm interrupted when I'm in that flow state, and it gets frustrating. And one of the tough things about working from home is, family members sometimes get used to having access to you, in your pets and stuff like that. I know I'm in a flow state when something interrupts that flow state and I'm angry. That's how I know that my flow has been interrupted. Right? And sometimes it'll be my wife coming in. Hey, what do you want for lunch? And I'm like, oh, right? Just that my flow was interrupted. I try not to be short, but sometimes I can be. And she's like, sorry, blah blah blah, right? And I'm like, no, I'm sorry, right? The whole smoothing things over, but then she'll say something like, "You've just been silent in here for like 2 hours," and it's like, "Oh, I just lost 2 hours of time, right?" Because I was deep in flow state, deep in hack state. Um, I totally agree with that. Flow state is where my day flies by. That's where I'm enjoying things. If I can't get into a flow state, my day just drags on. I don't feel like my job is as enjoyable. That's a really, really good point, Johanderson. I like that one. Um, anyway, let's go take a look at what we came here for today. So these are all available on my repo. So if we go here to my pull request, and we open up closed, you guys can see all of this stuff. Yeah, flow state is definitely one of the big reasons to. I think it's huge, right? Flow state, it's just an amazing feeling. Anyway, I just posted the link to all of my closed pull requests. So for this one, we started back on June 1st, right? So we've been going in this for a little over 2 months now. It's taken us 2 months to do Tour of Heroes. But the place where I added Gemini code is here. So this branch is the first one that was reviewed by Gemini. And the code reviews are actually decent, right? So the first thing we get is, hey, I'm the Gemini Code Assist. I'm currently reviewing the pull request. This is added to when you start using Gemini Code Assist, it will ask if you want to add it to GitHub. I added it to GitHub, and that's where this is coming from, right? It's telling us that, hey, we're using Angular and NX, and we're using NGRX signal events, right, to maintain it. So it picked up our dependency upgrades. It picked up a management refactor, right? The hero store has been refactored to adopt an event-driven approach using signal events, which we then ripped out, right? But this was a whole stream where we were using NGRX signal events. We updated module resolution from node to bundler. I think this was probably done by NX, and NX did some stuff here. But then we start getting into the code review, right? And So right here, it's saying, hey, the partial state updater type is no longer needed after the refactoring. Consider removing it from the import. And this was something that we picked up. This has been solved already. But if we had taken a look at this, we could have caught it earlier, right? Um, yeah, the flow state is a very satisfying experience, and I can't allow a tool to take that away from me. That's why I don't like non-deterministic autocomplete. Interesting, very very interesting. Um, that's a so code aware autocomplete can often create code messes that you don't want, right? And that's like there have been times where I feel like I'm fighting with the autocomplete. And if you're going into Cursor, like one of the biggest complaints people have about Cursor is when Cursor takes all this code that they spent time writing and throws it away, right? I totally get that. I typically bounce ideas with AI before working and then dive alone into the code. And that's the kind of flow that I I submit that a flow and a work, a process like that, you're going to produce at your highest level because the AI has already helped you identify areas where it's going to be important for you to be at that level, right? Um, and I totally agree with that flow. Um, I think it would be a rewarding way to work with an AI. And that's the one thing that I do want to call out here. And AI is here to stay. There's just no way around it. And you can't be an old curmudgeon out there like, back in my day we used chisels to do the bits, right, and stuff like. No, you can't do that. Um, there's always been people like that, right? Talking about their punch cards and who knows what. And I have a lot of respect for people who did punch cards. I've done punch cards twice and I hated every minute of it. Um, it's not a fun experience. And I have a lot of respect for people that did that. But I also very much appreciate the people who are like, punch cards suck. Let's get rid of them. Right. And it's the same with a lot of other things we do, and I think AI is another one of those tools that's taking things that really really sucked about our job and making them better. um, but you can take it to the extreme. Just before the stream today, I was preparing a bit this morning, and I was reading a story about a guy who was bragging that he's made $3 million selling AI books on Amazon. Um, and that made me sad. It makes me sad that people are paying money and enriching this guy because he can make an AI spit stuff out in such a form that people are willing to pay for it. I'm a bit jealous too, I'll be honest, that he's making $3 million selling basically the output from prompts. But I mean, there's more to it than that. He claims that it's 70% AI and the 30% him going in and editing. I'm willing to bet that it's more of an 80-20 type rule. Um, who knows? Even if we take him at face value, that means that the AI made 2.1 million of that 3 million, and he made 900K, right? So it's the math works against him, I guess, in that one, that but he was smart enough to identify a need and fill it. Anyway, that's the dark side of AI, I think, where people are just selling AI slop to people. Um, Talking about considering us inlining this on function for better readability. So the with reducer on. So we created this update hero name. And this is a place where the AI is not wrong, right? The update hero name makes a lot of sense here, if it's only used once. But the update hero name was intended to be used more than once. And so this is where the AI's context is not good. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to pull this up is that the AI is making some typical suggestions that you'll get in PRs. Like I wouldn't be surprised to get this suggestion from somebody else, right? Who's reviewing my PR. And this is where I really was impressed by how well um, Gemini understood Angular. That it understood my reducer, it understood my on and things like that, right? But really, it didn't understand the code. What it's seeing is it's seeing this function that's only called once, and is falling back on, hey, inline this. This is a place where when you're doing a code review, right? When you're doing a PR or a merge request or whatever you call them, right, at your company, you're going to get suggestions like this. This suggestion is not wrong, right? What this suggestion is saying is, hey, you're only using this function once. It's probably easier for people to maintain and read if you do this, because the reality is that when the compiler runs, the compiler is going to build, a link table of all the functions. But if it sees a function only used once, it's going to inline it. So instead of this, the generated code is most likely going to look like this. And if the generated code doesn't look like this, then most likely the JITted code will definitely, it will most likely be like this. Because inlining the functions means one less function lookup. It means, right, a whole bunch of other stuff, right? Less memory, because you don't have to maintain that function pointer in the table. You don't have to do the lookups. You don't have to do all this other stuff. So if you've got a function that's only used once in your compiler, it's often better to just inline it, because the human isn't having to, right? The human isn't having to maintain that giant block of code. However, this isn't wrong, right? This is easier to read than this. For me to understand what this does, I have to go look at the code and see, oh, it does this. This isn't wrong. However, this is an opportunity, and this is where any juniors to mid-level, even senior, I'm going to say anybody, right, who's going through a PR. This is a place where it's easy to be offended by what's said. And the way the AI put this is not bad. Oh, I've got my zoom on, right? I was going to try and move up, right? It's marking it as a medium priority. So it's not the lowest priority, but it's not the highest, right? So it's somewhere in the middle. But you can imagine, getting a code review being like, this is wrong, inline the function. And you're like, whoa, wait, what? Right? I've gotten plenty of comments like that in my code. I'm sure I've made some comments like that in the past. I try not to make comments like that. I try to be more like the AI is here, where I'm like, hey, consider this, or what do you think about inlining this into the on function? Or right, the reason I like to use questions comes down to, I'm a big fan of Stoics, and in particular, I'm a very big fan of Socrates. And then I read the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. Maybe it wasn't the autobiography. Maybe it was just a biography. I'm not even sure if Benjamin Franklin wrote his own autobiography. It wasn't an autobiography, it was a biography. I read a biography of Benjamin Franklin, where Benjamin Franklin was this amazing diplomat for the United States. That's why his face is on the $100 bill, along with a bunch of other things that he did. But he was this amazing diplomat, and um, towards the end of his life, he was talking about how he developed his diplomatic skills. One of the first things he did is he took all negatives out of his vocabulary. I don't do that. I leave negatives in my vocabulary. But the second thing he did is, the reason he took the negatives out is he didn't want to directly disagree with somebody. Once you directly disagree with somebody, you're digging in and they're digging in, and it basically becomes a tug of war over who has the most power, who has what, right? Um, Dialectic meiotic method rocks, exactly. And I probably butchered the last one, but um, the point is, you see things from a different point of view, right? And the way I like to talk about this is, right, we're looking at the code down here, right? This is me. Wow, that was horrible. Up here, and this is you. Um, right, and we're both looking down into this code. From my point of view, I'm seeing something. From your point of view, you're seeing something different. Me coming in and saying, "Hey, what you see is wrong," you're like, dude, you're not even looking at it from my point of view. How can you say that what I see is wrong, right? And this often happens in code reviews, in PRs, in merge requests, or stuff like that, where you get somebody who's just like, "You're wrong," and somebody else is like, "No, I'm right," and they're looking at the code from an entirely different point of view from you. How do we solve that? Um, you can start by saying, "Hey, I'm seeing this. What do you think about it?" Right? And they're like, "Wait, what? You're seeing what?" Because from their point of view, there might be this obstruction for whatever reason, right? It might be personal, who knows what, right? And from your point of view, this obstruction also works because you can't see, what they're seeing, and who knows, right? There's this obstruction in the way. You're like, "Hey, I'm seeing this." They're like, "Wait, what?" And so then you can start talking about what you're seeing. And it's no longer about, "Hey, you're wrong." It's more, "I'm seeing this," and you're like, "Well, I don't see that." And then we start to try and piece together what both of our point of views are seeing, so that we can get the whole picture, because I'm only seeing what's on this side of, whatever, and you're only seeing what's on this side of whatever. And by talking it through, we can understand what both people are seeing and arrive at a better place, right? Consider this is a good way to approach it. I prefer to approach it from, "I'm seeing this. What do you think about it?" Or right here, the way I would rephrase this is, "What do you think about inlining the update hero name into the on function?" Right? So now I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying, "Hey, I see something different. What do you think about it?" And that gives you the chance to be like, right? In this case, my response to this PR is, "I don't want to inline this because I want to use update hero name in other places in the code. So I intentionally factored it out." If I come in and I say, "Hey, idiot, you're only using this function once. You should inline it," right? One, I've come in and I'm immediately combative. Two, I've insulted you. And three, I'm forcing you to make a decision on what I'm saying, rather than rather than trying to meet you in the middle. I'm forcing you to be like, you have to prove that you're not an idiot. You have to prove that what you're doing is not wrong, and that often leads to combative. Hey, idiot. I'm going to be using this for other stuff, right? And so then you wind up with these passive aggressive PRs that are super toxic. We've all seen them, right? We want to avoid that. So in this case, I've spent a lot of time on this topic, but I think it's an important topic for us as professional engineers to understand. This is good. Better is, what do you think about on inlining update hero name into the on function in your reducer? Um, and now it's not me being like, "Hey, you're an idiot." Now it's like, "Hey, I see something different than you. What do you think about it?" And you can be like, "No, I'm going to use that." And suddenly it's no longer a toxic competitive environment. Now it's a collaborative environment. At the end of the day, is you and me versus the problem, not you versus me. I love that, Johanderson. Um, Man, anybody who thinks that way is an instant hire for me. I am a huge collaborative person. Um, I I don't think anybody ever comes to work and like, you know what? I am doing the absolute worst job I can today. I'm sabotaging the company, blah, blah, blah. There might be people like that. I'm not going to be naive and think that everybody isn't like that, right? But the vast majority of people come to work and they're like, oh, I'm trying to do my best. I'm buried under X, Y, and Z. I'm doing the best I can. Um, and so, if a team member comes out and they're like, hey, let's solve this together, that's a much better experience than like, hey, you're an idiot. I'm not an idiot. And, you're looking at me like, you don't even do half the stuff I do. And I'm looking at you like, you don't even do half the stuff I do. We're in a combative environment. I love that. Write AI extension for changing your passive aggressive comments in your PR to rephrase the following to be warm, positive, and hypnotic. I will tell you that kindness can be used as a weapon too. And there are people out there weaponizing trust and kindness and things like that. I don't think you have to be, I don't think I have to be rainbows and unicorns and hugs and candy and all this stuff all the time, right? Um, what I do think you should be is a team player. You should be there looking at the other people on your team as teammates and how do we succeed? Not, man, that person sucks, right? Um, and sports analogies are quite common, but when I was in high school, I played a lot of basketball. I'm short. I'm very short. Um, I'm not very short, but I'm short for a basketball player. Let's put it that way. So I was never going to be super good at basketball, but I did play on a lot of rec leagues and stuff like that. And one of the things that tears a team apart faster than anything is the player who's, why didn't you catch the ball? Why didn't you rebound? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Right? Instead of a good team leader will be like, hey, even if it's one person that sucks the entire, period between, whenever and the timeout, the good leader is the one who's there like, hey, we need to button things down. We need to do this. We need to do this. We need to do this. Attack it from a team perspective. And it doesn't have to be totally positive. But what it doesn't do is single somebody out, because as soon as you start singling somebody out, then the rest of the team starts to attack that one person. So, yeah, instead of this person sucks, you could think, how can you help him or her? Exactly, right? Ciao, man. It is awesome to see you, brother. It has been so long. Um, if you guys don't know, Chow is one of the very first people who ever attended my streams. Um, Chow's an amazing guy. I'm glad to have you here, man. Um, It's been a very long time. We need to catch up. I there there's been a lot going on, and I think it's this way in everybody's life, right? And maybe this is me projecting, but a lot of people just have been busy. I'm I'm actually working on catching up with a lot of people. We definitely need to talk. Um, I don't want to. Well, I think I already doxed you by saying your name, but I don't want to. I don't want to do more than that. Not gonna be at NG Conf this year, man. If it was in Salt Lake City, I would probably pay for it myself. It's not an approved conference where I am. I don't understand why. Um, I I'm looking at the conferences that are approved to see where I'll be. This is the Chow that created NG3. This is the Chow that is part of NG extensions. This is the Chow that this is the Chow. Well, here's the thing: we don't know if this is the Chow or one of his clones, but it's definitely Chow. He is definitely a legend. Very happy to have you here. Um, yeah. Um, Component Store, NX, and all other interesting stuff. It's been a while. You'll be missing my first time. Oh, brother. I will be tuned in. I will be watching it remote. I will first time on the NG Conf stage. I've been turned down for NG Conf every year. And I keep submitting. If I'd been accepted to NG Conf, I would have been there. But dude, congratulations! That's awesome. I'm looking forward to your talk. Um, yeah, Chow's on Twitch, but Chow's just an amazing guy, and if you can ever get Chow and Brandon Roberts together, you're in for an. It's awesome. I love talking to Chow and Brandon Roberts at the same time, and um, the third person I haven't had the pleasure of being a part of that discussion, but I imagine Chow, Brandon, and Josh Maroney. I imagine the three of them are a wild time. So, yeah, very much looking forward to it. I'm really bummed that I'm not going to be at NG Conf this year. This will be the first NG Conf that I've missed. I've been to every NG Conf since they started back in the Angular JS days. So that's a good job. I love it. Um, yeah, um, very much looking forward to your talk. Are you able to share what your topic is, Chow? And while he's doing that, let's go take a look at the next pull request, right, that we got. Um, so here's the pull request from 1 week later. Um, oh dang! I've seen Chow talk about this a couple of times, and he even came on stream here and shared some stuff that he's done with the custom renderer. If you guys aren't familiar with Angular 3, and I keep talking about wanting to use Angular 3, I just haven't gotten there. Angular 3 is a way that you can do browser 3D using Angular components, like standalone Angular components. Everything from adding textures to light sources to physics models to all sorts of stuff can be done with just the Angular that we understand. And this is done through some amazing it's done through some amazing understanding of how the Angular renderer works and some incredible magic behind the scenes that he's using to translate Angular code into Three.js code. Um, and like the amount of magic in Angular 3 and the stuff that Chow has figured out. Um, I go to Angular 3 quite a bit when I'm trying to understand why my directives aren't working or things like that, because he's got some amazing directives and just some really, really cool stuff in Angular 3. If you guys haven't checked out Angular 3, you should for sure check it out. Um, Even if you're not interested um, in browser rendering or anything like that, the library itself is a master class in understanding how the Angular renderer works, how directives work, how components work, and just stuff like that. It's well worth your time. Um, and I'm fairly certain you will inspire Chow. It's got to be one of the best application of customer. I hands down, I haven't seen anything that even comes close. Um, and I'm willing to bet that anybody else who does custom renderers is going to Angular 3 to look at how Chow did it. Um, so very much agree with you, Johanderson here. Um, so anyway, a week later, right, we get this one code review, and we get a high priority comment. There's a typo in the Tailwind CSS class. Use a CSS variable custom property for utility. You need to wrap it in square brackets, not parentheses. This typo will prevent max height property from being applied correctly. I'm not sure if this is correct because I think we tried the square brackets first. And this is where, so we can go take a look at this, right? So the heroes view TS. Let's go take a look at our heroes view TS. So heroes view TS. No, it's here. It is right here. So let's pop this one open. And so here's where it's saying that we're doing it wrong. Things have changed just a little bit since then. But our max 8 card height, it says we should change this to square brackets. So if we take a look at our code right now, and the max height is what's controlling the height of this card right here. And we can see that it is using the variable to control it. So I'm very curious if we swap this, we square brackets like it says. Let's compile it. We may have to stop the, so it did detect the changes. Let's see. So things seem to be working, but let's just kill the compiler just to be certain. Go ahead and run it again. 3D is nice, but whenever I try advanced animations, 3D, it burns my browser every time. 3D 3D takes, there's a lot of cheating that goes on to do optimizations, right? There's culling planes and there's all sorts of stuff you hear about in game dev. And the thing is, when you first start doing 3D and things like that, you don't realize a lot of the cheating that takes place to get the kind of views that you're used to um, with the speed that you're used to in modern games. There's a lot of cheating that takes place there, and if you don't realize all that cheating that's taking place with, I mean, modern ray tracing and culling and all of this other stuff, you can easily you can easily create a scene that seems super simple that just chews up all of your RAM and everything, right? Um, and yeah, it's the problem is that, oh, look at that. So that's why I wanted to stop this and recompile. So the suggestion's actually wrong, and I remembered testing this, um, and it is the parentheses that work. I'm not sure why Gemini says that this is wrong, but now if we refresh, we can see that, hey, now we're getting our card height and it's doing what we expect it to do. Um, what we should really be doing, and this is something that we're going to do in the future, this is not the right way to do stuff. What we should really be doing is we should be looking at our entire site and be using a grid. A grid would allow us to do some of the stuff we're doing here. We're cheating, which when you look at a lot of software, there's a lot of cheating going on. And a lot of times when you're writing software, and this happens on stream too, right? We've only got 2 hours to do stuff a lot of times. And in those 2 hours, we've got to prioritize what's the most important thing to show. I could struggle through a grid for 2 hours and you guys would be bored out of your minds. Or, we could throw something up that sort of works, start talking about, the stuff that we really wanted to talk about, which was the state management and things like that, right? Like the stuff we're seeing here, we could start talking about that. Or, right, I can struggle through a grid and make it look nice and stuff. Or we can come back to it later, because that's the beauty of designing your Angular to be composable, is we aren't married to this layout. Our Angular is composable. We can come back and we can fix this stuff up. There's a lot of like tweaks to the UI that I want to make. Right now it's a functional UI, and it's the type of UI that I typically tend to create at first. And then I engage my friends who are much better at UIs, and they're like, yeah, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. What we can do is we could probably move this clear messages button up next to the messages, right? Reclaiming some space here. We can also make use of a grid so that we aren't overflowing as things grow. We can control the size of the grid and then control the overflow of the elements within that grid. There's a bunch of things we can do, and that's something we'll come back to. But I do want to call out that, again, we've got this PR thing here, and this goes back to the toxicity, right? By tagging this high priority, already I'm worried that, oh no, we've got a serious bug, right? And then there's a typo in the CSS class. Coming from a robot, I don't care as much, right? If this was coming from somebody like Chow, I'd be like, oh shit, what do I do? Right? Like, Chow is seeing something that I'm not seeing. And it's the same way at our companies, right? If somebody at the senior level or the staff level says, hey, there's a typo in here, and you're sure that there's not a typo, this leads to stress. And again, how do we handle this? From my point of view, the way I would handle this, if I was a junior developer, or if I had an aggressive developer telling me, hey, this is wrong, what I would do is what we just did on stream, but I would either capture a video, right, of this is it with the square brackets and this is it with the parentheses, if I had the ability to edit that video down, or I would send screenshots. Here's what the screen looks like with square brackets. Here's what it looks like with parentheses. And in that case, they came out and said, hey, you're wrong, right? There's a typo in this Tailwind class. You know you're not wrong, but how do you diffuse the aggressiveness of the statement? And they may not intend to be aggressive here, right? Like, I know this is a robot, so the robot's probably not aggressive. But say this was a comment from me and you were having to deal with it. Well, maybe I'm dealing with 10 different PRs and I've encountered this over and over and over again. And I've got tired of spelling it out. So now I'm to the point where I'm like, there's a typo here. There's a typo here. There's a typo here, right? So I'm not really trying to be aggressive, but I'm also not being as friendly as I could be. If you come back at me with an evidence-based, okay, I tried that. Here's what it looks like with the square brackets. Here's what it looks like with the parentheses, right? I look at that and I'm like, oh, I'm completely wrong. You're right. Let's ignore this. And we move on. If you come back and you're like, no, that's wrong. I have to use parentheses here, blah, blah, blah. What I'm going to do, because I'm not going to go run your code as a PR reviewer, I'm going to go to the website and I'm going to pull out all the documentation on why what you're saying is wrong. And I'm going to throw that at you. And you're going to write, and we're going to wind up in this big, long argument when just some evidence-based, this is what, hey, I tried it. This is what it looks like. This is what it looks like, right? And then I can't argue against the evidence, even if I'm being aggressive and hostile. I can't argue against that evidence, right? This is what it looks like with it. This is what it looks like with the parentheses. And so that's my suggestion, right? I do know that PRs and code reviews and merge requests, right? Whatever you call them, they're a stressful situation, especially as a junior and especially as a new junior. My best piece of advice: never assume that the person is attacking you personally. Even if they are attacking you personally, never assume that. If they are attacking you personally, start taking examples of where you're being attacked personally and go to HR. That's my suggestion there. You should never be attacked personally for what you're doing at your work. Well, I don't really think people should ever be attacked personally, but that's a bigger difference, right? But at work, if you're being attacked personally and you can document it and take it to HR. If you can't document it, then start figuring out ways to document it and then take that to HR, right? In this case, 1, never assume you're being attacked personally. 2, take the advice at face value. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But provide evidence, right? And you're taking this out of a me versus you situation, like we were talking about with Johanderson earlier. You're taking this into, hey, I'm a team player. I tried this. This is what I got. This is what I get if I go back to where we are, right? So now you've gone from me versus you to me trying to do what you're saying this is what I get. And then when I see that coming from a junior or somebody, I'm like, oh, wait. And I either ignore it or I go, oh, yeah, there's a key piece of information I didn't give you. Here's that key piece of information. And the key piece of information that they didn't give us here is that for this to work, you have to use var. So with square brackets, you have to use var. Parentheses is shortcut for square brackets var. And that's the difference here. So yeah, that's impressive. Yeah, that one renders apparent. Oh, okay. You guys are sharing some stuff. Yeah. A balancing game when it comes to 3D on the web. And that we're getting some new stuff with 3D rendering and 3D rendering pipelines that are coming to browsers soon, but they're still, I think, they're still level 2 proposals. And so until they're level 3, you won't see the browsers starting to implement them in any meaningful way. Yeah. So again, I wanted to take this as partly to show, this is what the AI came up with, but I also wanted to show how do we handle these situations at work, because code reviews and pull requests are often a stressful situation to be in, and quite often you've spent a ton of time working on whatever you've checked in, you're proud of it, and somebody comes along and is like poking holes in it, right? Like you spend a whole bunch of time working really really hard, and somebody's coming along and they're like, yeah, but you could do this different, you could do this, and it's very very hard not to take that personally. So my first piece of advice is, one, never assume malice. Two, try not to take it personally. It can be difficult, and it's difficult for me too. And three, be evidence based always. And if you're on the other side of things, I have written stuff like this. Usually, it comes after I've reviewed 4 or 5 PRs in a day, right, in the last little bit, and I'm seeing the same thing over and over again. And in one PR, I saw it a bunch of times, so I started shortening it in that one PR, and then everybody else who comes along after that gets a very terse statement like this, right? Where I don't take the time. Um, I always try when I'm reviewing PRs to make it a good experience for me and for them. So I try to reframe it as a question, right? Um, you know, why are you using parentheses here? Aren't square brackets the way that Tailwind says to do it? Um, even that's a little bit aggressive, but that would be softer than what we've got here. And then they can be like, oh yeah, but you use parentheses when you don't want to add var inside of the square brackets, right? Um, so this one's another high priority. The update hero name function has several areas for improvement. So bug with hero ID 0. And if you guys remember, we came in and we fixed this bug. However, if I had read this, I think we fixed it last week, and this PR was a couple weeks ago. So if I'd read this, it's saying, hey, not hero ID will evaluate to true if hero ID is 0, preventing updates for such a hero. And we did catch that. Yeah, this piece right here is what it's talking about, right? We had an issue where you couldn't remove the empty name because of hero name, but there's the same issue for hero ID. We fixed this bug, but it called it out. Behavioral regression. It prevents updating a hero's name when an empty string because not that is true. Again, right? If I read my PR, we would have caught the other bug. Missing trim. The hero name is not trimmed, which was part of the original logic. And so if we look here, notice that we were calling trim here, but here we're not using trim. It actually called this out, and it's right. So we need to go take a look at our hero store on line 64. One thing that I suggest is when something is caught in a PR or a bug, create a test case for it. We're coming up short on time here. We're going to skip that. So I'm already being a hypocrite or a bad example here, right? But this is a good call out, and we should, right, in an enterprise environment, you should create a test case for this so that we catch the negative case and the positive case. Let's go take a look at our hero store, and we need to fix on line 64. And we can see that this is the case if we go take a look at our application here, and we just go a bunch of spaces. When we look at the hero name here, Oh, it's going to be trimmed by the but it's a bunch of spaces, and a bunch of spaces doesn't make sense, or like a bunch of spaces, Jason, right, doesn't make sense. The HTML is cleaning this up, but when we come back to it, we can see, and down here we can see that we're creating a mess. Um, this isn't this isn't a good experience, and that's why the trim was there originally. So if we go into our hero store, and here it is. So we dispatched the hero. No, that's the computed. Update hero name. We dispatch that to. So it's in the update hero name function that we talked a bunch about earlier, right? So hero name is undefined. Oh, we've still got the bug for hero ID. And we can talk about how to fix that, but let's fix this right here. We want hero name dot trim. So now we can trim that off. We'll be good there. But this hero ID is still a bug. We've already got the tests. We've got the notion about tests here. We're going to add the same, right? To do add tests to check for hero ID 0. This should be allowed. And so we can fix this one also. We can also go with if it equals undefined, because hero ID has to be a number. So the not hero ID solves that issue, right? Or the not hero ID presented the bug for hero ID 0. The other thing we could do is we could say, hey, we want our heroes to be greater than or equal to 0. We can say, hey, it needs to be greater than or equal to 0, right? Because we don't want negative hero IDs. If we just check for undefined or not hero ID, we could have negative hero IDs. So this even fixes that issue, right? We can also say that, hero IDs should not be negative. And so when we get back into testing this, we can make sure that we write tests for that too. So already our AI has caught some good stuff for us. This review was where I was like, okay, maybe it knows what's going on, right? And this behavioral regression is cool. The missing trim is cool. Inefficient no-op returning heroes when no update is needed can be inefficient. It's better to return an empty object. This is true, right? It might be better to return an empty object. The problem we've got is that this isn't a partial updater. Our partial updater is going to be applied to the state. If we returned an empty object here, then we would patch the state with an empty object. That's not what we want. We want the state to get, we want the state to be patched with whatever comes back. We could add some logic here that says, we patch the state with the update hero name. Well, we do update hero name. We set it in a variable. If it's an empty object, then we skip over patching the state and blah, blah, blah. whatever, right? Not we don't really want to do that. What we do want to do is patch the state. Um, we want to return the list of heroes because then the state patching can happen. The reason that it's saying it's inefficient is we could be unintentionally creating a memory leak here. And what could be happening is, say we've got, right, this group of heroes. We'll call this 0 instead of 1, like I was trying to, right? So this is group of heroes 0, and that slash is incredibly in the wrong place. Let's say we've got something referencing this, right? So we've got some object out here that references this. Then we come back and we create 1, and another object references this, right? And then we do the same with 2 and 3. Well, until this object reference goes away, we're leaking memory. This memory needs to be taken up in the browser until the browser can break this connection, and then this can be garbage collected. Same with this, right? And same with everything else. So we could be leaking memory by having things reference our state. One way to handle this is to make your state immutable. And so then you won't wind up with mutations that can lead to this type of stuff. But there's no real way to stop this. And that's why it's saying, hey, this could be a problem because you're returning a new object that's using the heroes array, right? And so we could potentially be leaking memory. And that's a very real possibility here. The nice thing about using Signal Store is that Signal Store is abstracting that access away, and it's providing almost a proxy, a layer on top of that access. So it becomes much more difficult for us to wind up with memory that won't go away. We can take a look at that because that's a really good call out. The inefficiencies that we're introducing here by creating a new object that has the array in it, and right there's a whole bunch of potential inefficiencies here. The nice thing about Signal Store is that this is unlikely to happen a lot. If we were in a real-time environment or something like that, where the number of updates was expensive, and then we would be optimizing for this. What we're optimizing for here is code readability and ease of maintenance. To be able to create code that optimizes away the access and things like that would require more work and make the code more difficult to maintain. Even if we put an abstraction on top of it, maintaining that abstraction in our heads is more overhead. So we're optimizing for ease of use and ease of coding. We can test for this situation and see if we're leaking memory. If we're leaking memory, then we can address the memory leak. But I don't think that this will be the issue. If we leak memory, this is unlikely to be the issue. It's the way we're doing something else somewhere else. So how do you handle this case, right? Again, say you're a junior engineer and somebody comes along and they say, hey, this is inefficient, right? It's better to just return an empty object. What should you do in this case? Where you don't feel confident enough to argue the opposite case. And this is a case where somebody who wants to come to you and say this, ask them to help you fix it, right? Again, be a team player. Be like, okay, I want to do what you're saying. Can you show me how to do that? Can I get an hour of your time where we can talk about it? You can show me how to do it. I would love to learn how to do it, right? Basically, you're stoking their ego, making them feel better, right? but at the same time, you're also getting them into the code, and they can be like, oh, yeah, they can find a way to say, oh, yeah, what you're doing is okay. But again, um, not being combative against stuff like this, but instead being like, hey, I would love to do this. Can you show me how? Is again, you being a team player. It goes from me versus you to you asking me to be like, hey, can you teach me how to do this? And maybe I have a good way to do it. The reality is, every statement has an it depends attached to it. We're hitting the it depends. We're optimizing for different things here, right? Notice that it says it can be inefficient. It doesn't say it is inefficient. It says it can be. So that's some wiggle room here where it's like, well, technically it could be if you had a million objects and you were leaking memory and blah, 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 right? No. um, let's go be a team. Let's figure it out together and see if it is inefficient. And if it's not, we're going to ignore it. It doesn't. The amount of engineering to solve this issue is probably more expensive than the issue would ever cost. Confusing variable name. I really like this call out, right? This says current hero, but it's really holding the index. I really like this call out. It's a good call out. Let's go fix that call out. So here, instead of current hero, we can say, hey, we want current hero index, right? And now our variable is not confusing. This was a really good call out because what happened is we were originally finding the hero because the hero didn't have it. It was just the hero name, right? And so we were doing a find and stuff like that. Once we moved over to the object, we changed this to a find index, but we didn't change the hero name. And this wound up being a problem, which the PR rightly called out. So, oh no, we didn't even change that. I think this PR is missing a bunch of intermediary changes here, right? But the call out is still not wrong. This is totally correct that we're finding an index, we're treating it like an index, but we're calling it current hero. And somebody who comes along later and sees current hero might try to grab like current hero.name or something like that, not realizing that I've got a bad name. So this is a really good call out and why I really like the way it did this, right? And then it refactored it. So here, this actually breaks our updater. And this is one place where it probably doesn't understand how a partial state updater interacts with a patch statement, right? Like a patch state statement. So this is bad advice. But it's interesting that it's doing a triple equals. We talked about the difference between triple and double equals here. But it did pick up the trim. Oh, it's doing the trim before the find index instead of here where I did it. That's an interesting choice. That's a good choice and a good call out here. Oh, but we aren't using the name anymore, so that's why I didn't do it. So we're using the ID because the ID is going to be better than the name. It's interesting that. Oh, we're even using the name here. It's very interesting. So here's an engineering choice that I tend to make, and this one is personal preference, but I think I have good reason for that personal preference. Doing this trim here gets us nothing. Because let's say I'm doing the trim here, we don't find the hero ID. Well, me doing this trim was wasted computation time. Here's another thing that I get the intent, but signals are going to, well, not necessarily, because it's a new object reference. So the intent here, I understand. I actually don't disagree with this intent. However, for our use case, this is extra code. And again, we're returning empty objects here, so this is broken. Like I'm not against this. Do we don't have that in here. I'm not against this. This is just an extra compare that is really, it's an edge case that we're optimizing here, is the way I would present this. This is going to run. So if we look at, and I don't think you need to optimize every piece of code to this extent, right? But if we look at this code, what we're trying to do is optimize away extra compares, extra code, extra things like that, right? So here, if the hero name is undefined or we don't have an ID, we return the list of heroes, right? We don't want to do any of this code, right? So this if statement is saving us a bunch of code here. But we have to remember that this if statement is run on every update. So I would say 99.9% of the time, we are going to have a hero name. We are going to have an ID. So this is code that's really only optimizing like, that 0.1% of edge cases. I think this is a strong enough edge case because we're saving, 80% of the function in that 1%. So overall, it's a bigger savings, and this isn't difficult for people to understand or maintain. It also allows us to encapsulate some of the logic for the update hero name that if we didn't have this here, they would potentially have to do that anytime they wanted to call update hero name. So this is useful. This I would move down here because as soon as we pass this, and we've already said this is like 99.9% of the cases, right? We're going to run a trim on the hero name. But then we're going to look and see if the hero ID is in our index of IDs, right? Or in our array. This isn't bad. And we actually added this code. The code is in the wrong place because it's going to be run through, run every time this code runs, basically, because we said this is an edge case, right? This is essentially an edge case too, but again, it's saving us a good portion of the code. Moving this down here means that this trim is only ever run when we actually update the hero. This piece of code is code that's going to be run, and again, I would say 99.9% of the cases, but it's such a minimal difference. The difference between this and this is so tiny. We're creating a new object in both cases. That this doesn't really gain anything. If this was a bigger deal, then I would say do it. But this is where analyzing your code, right? Because with this in place, we've got an index reference, we've got a property reference on that index, and we've got to compare against another string, right? And this is why we're doing the name trim here. If we don't do this, then we don't need this name variable to be used here and here. So we don't need to do the trim outside of here. So this is adding extra code anyway. Well, I don't know. But it adds a bunch of extra processing time for very, very little benefit. I would argue almost zero benefit, because returning the original array or returning the original object or returning a new object with the same name, where name is a string, those are, and where we've already created the trimmed name, right? And so if you guys understand the way like names are contained in JavaScript, strings are immutable. So if you concat to a string, you've created two strings and then a third string that is the concatenation of those two strings. So if you take the same string and you concat onto that string multiple times, basically what you're doing is, right, we've got the original string and then we concat a piece onto it, which is a bigger string, right? And then we take this bigger string and we concat a piece onto it, which winds up in an even bigger string, right? And this happens in arrays, and maybe this string right here is constant. And in most cases, this doesn't matter. But it is using up a bunch of memory. And we're doing the same thing here. By setting this name, we're setting a string value in memory. And these objects in most compares will look the same because the same value, right? If I compare 1, 2, 3, right, the string 1, 2, 3 to, you know what, this is better to do in the browser, right? So if I do 1, 2, 3, triple equals 1, 2, 3, it's true. Even though these are two different strings, as far as the browser is concerned, these are the same string because of the way string compares work. So most objects are going to look at this object being created here as being the same as the object that we would have normally returned. This really does nothing for us except add extra CPU time. And so I actually disagree with this change. And you know, that's me on my soapbox about how I like to structure code. But this change forces us to create a new variable, which, right, there's a bunch wrong here, and this variable gets thrown away, which basically, if this was run in a tight loop, this is you know, this is garbage collection pressure is basically what we're creating here with this and this. So I disagree with that. The test suite for hero detail component is very basic. Yeah, totally true. I totally agree. The key up event is not ideal for capturing input changes. It fires for non-printing keys like Shift, Control, Alt. This is a good one to call out. I don't remember hero detail components. It's saying we should use the input event. Let's take a look at the hero detail component. I think we're still using the key up, and the reason we're using the key up event still is we want the hero name to change. If we change this to an input event, what happens, right? So again, scientific proof here, right? We want to be scientific about this. So windstorm, and we change this to test. Notice that windstorm hasn't been changed until Do I have a problem with my code? We change this to an input event. This is calling update hero name. Let's just right here, console.log update hero name called. And here we want events and hero ID. And let's see what we get out of this, right? Does this actually log anything? Let's go back here. Let's refresh. So our input event is firing. So it is firing. We're getting our event. But we don't get it for shift, right? We're getting it only when inputs are happening. But what we're not getting is the value out of the event. So we know this is firing, so we need to look at value prop. And that's event target. So if we go down here to get value prop, get value prop called with target, right? And we know that's calling has value prop. And we can just be const has value prop. Well, we don't even need to go here. We can go here and we can just go console.log as value prop. And we're just going to go has value prop target. Right. And now we can see that it's probably has value prop that's failing. We come back here and we go with test. No, it actually says it's true. So has value prop is true. So we need target.value. So let's log target.value here. Oh, we can't do that here. We can do it here. Oh no, we can't. All right, well, we don't need to log it. So we can look at this input ID and it says we have a value on it. Our value is test. So we are getting a value here. So test, we can see here that we do have it. And on our input, we are getting test. So the problem isn't where I thought it was. Update hero name. So we're calling that. So we can console.log name. Let's just see what we're getting for the name, right? And our name is test. I've broken something else here. Oh, damn it. This needs to be less than or equal. Oh. So, Chow's asking, if it breaks my flow, please skip it. What have you been doing with this project? The point of this project is to take the old Tour of Heroes and look at it through the lens of an enterprise. So, like, if we were to write Tour of Heroes for an enterprise team, what would we be doing, right? How would we differ from the way that it's written in the tutorial? And the thing is, Tour of Heroes is deprecated, right? It hasn't existed since Angular 17. So this is old deprecated stuff anyway. But the point is, how would we separate our components? How would we separate our logic? How would we separate our state in a way that's maintainable? So yeah, that was my bad. So yeah, we can see that things are working as intended, right? So it was my fault. I had a greater than or equal to, and that's why tests should have been written. That right there is me getting bitten by being lazy and not writing my tests. We can see the stuff down here. So that would have been a bug in production. I do want to call that out. Like the way I behaved here, that would have been a bug in production, or if it didn't make it to production, it would have been a bug that like the QA team had to catch, or the QE team, right? It would have been a bug, and it wasn't an insignificant bug. And so that's one of the things to be aware of when you're it's the one. No, it's this one. You can take these console logs out now. You don't need them. But we can see that my laziness instantly bit me, and that that's you would hope that that's what you would see. And to be honest, if me as a dev wasn't testing the functionality, that's on me if that bug made it past me. But tests would have caught that before I ever made that mistake, right? And before I ever had to dig in and do all those console logs and all the debugging strategies that we just took there, my tests would have caught that, and they would have been automated, and they would have prevented me from making that mistake in the future also. So that's entirely on me for not writing tests, and I do want to call that one out. So let's see. We've made those changes. So the last thing, so the key up versus input. This was a good call out, and I tend to default to key up and then eventually make it back to input. So that was a good call out there. That can be simplified by casting the event target to HTML input element. This allows direct access to the value property and removes the need for get value prop, and has value prop helper functions, which can be can then be deleted for a cleaner implementation. This is bullshit. Um, this this suggestion here is the type of suggestion where I'm going to dig in my heels on a code review. And there's a good reason for this. It's saying that, hey, my get value prop and has value prop aren't needed because I can just say, hey, as HTML input element. This is 100% correct. This is also the type of statement that is incredibly difficult for a junior who is very well educated to fight against a senior. And this is why I call this bullshit, because this is uneducated. There's a reason why this is worse than the get value prop and the has value prop. The has value prop is necessary because this is a runtime check. Has value prop is a runtime check. This is a compile time check. This basically says, I know what target is. It's an HTML input element and it has a value. But that's not even true because the target could be unidentified. It could be null. It could be, right? So this target doesn't necessarily have a value. So me saying, hey, as this is wrong, right? Me implementing a type guard, and when you write your return statement, this value is this. This is known as a type guard in TypeScript. This is a runtime check, right? We're already checking that target is defined. We're already checking that target is an instance, and we're checking that value exists on target. All important checks. This allows us to pull the value off or return undefined. If we just cast here, right? We just event dot target as HTML input dot value, and you'll see that code a lot. That's a compile time check. What if event comes in as not an event but a string? What if event comes in as an array or a number or undefined or any number, and you're like, oh well, that can't happen, blah blah. Well, it may not be able to happen in the way the code is written right now. But let's say we make some changes to the code and we change what is in event, right? Then it's possible for that to happen. And that's where this problem comes in. The problem specifically being casting. In a strongly typed language like .NET, like Java, like C++, or things like that, this kind of casting is much safer. I'm not going to say it's totally safe, but it's much safer. It's borderline dangerous is what I'll call it in any sort of dynamic language. The thing is, target is not guaranteed to be an input element, right? I mean, we could change the type of event such that target is not an HTML element and doesn't have a value, and this code throws, right? Our code does not throw because we're using a type guard, which is a runtime check, and that's the gold standard in like ECMAScript, right? Is duck typing. When you need to guarantee a type, casting is not what you want to do. When you need to guarantee a type, you use duck typing, and that that's why I want to say. And this is the kind of comment that is very, very difficult for a junior or a mid-level dev to go up against a senior who's uninformed and be like, no, you're wrong, right? Because no, you can just cast it. You don't need all the extra code, right? That extra code's overhead. It's not overhead. It's saving us. It's calling out a typo in the describe. The heroes test suite, yeah. This is an interesting one. Not using BR. Console log appears to be for debugging purposes. Please remove it. That's true, right? Yeah. So, by the way, have you had opportunity to test AI review with CodeRabbit or Copilot? Is Gemini best? I don't know if Gemini's best. I have seen I've seen some code reviews from Copilot show up at work. I was very impressed by how well Gemini understood Angular. That was really what impressed me, right? Like we're still getting. This is what's a little bit scary to me. Like this BR stuff, I agree with it, but the reality is we're using the BR for the short term. I think we got rid of it later on, and we did use what it said with CSS. This statement actually makes me angry. That's probably why I spent so much time on it. This statement is so wrong on so many levels, and this is the problem. And it's not just AI code reviewers that will do this. I've actually had fights over this in the past, and this is like in strongly typed languages, which is where a lot of developers coming into web come from, right? Your .NETs, your Javas, your C++. You know, they're very strongly typed. This kind of cast is actually checked and is guaranteed. Well, not 100% guaranteed. There are ways around it with like dynamic types in C++, like in .NET, and dynamic types in Java, and certain types of boxing and unboxing can still make casts dangerous, but they're not as dangerous as they are in like ECMAScript. And I started calling it ECMAScript because Oracle still owns they still own the copyright on JavaScript, and that's why the ECMAScript group calls it ECMAScript. They've asked for Oracle to release the JavaScript, to release the JavaScript to the community because it means more than what Oracle is trying to say, and Oracle's not really using it. I hope that they get it back because I would love to call it JavaScript, but until they do, I'm calling it ECMAScript, like the group does, right? But in ECMAScript and even in TypeScript, this is a dangerous sense of false security. So, AI code reviewers are not always right. The thing that makes me so angry is that the code written the way I've written it, if it was written by a junior or even a mid-level dev, and maybe there's somebody who's just been watching my stuff and they may not be able to articulate why, they're going to get beat up by comments like this. This kind of stuff looks bad on them, right? And it can be demoralizing. This is the problem, but I'm not going to blame it on AI. Gene Mesh. I love Gene. John. I'm trusting you here, Ole. Event target types are not inferred on void elements. This means less assertions in your code. Yeah, okay. I did see this one. Yes. And Yeah, Matthew, amazing guy. I'm actually really disappointed I'm not going to be at NGConf. There's so many amazing people I haven't talked to in a long time that I would really love to talk to. Um, I I agree with this. Like Angular giving you the event target is so much better. It's an HTML5 thing though. It's actually a TypeScript thing. Um, so Angular making it easier on you is huge. Yeah, this means less TypeScript. Exactly. Um, and thank you for sharing that, Ola. Um, I agree with you, Michael. Finally, that's helpful. The last thing I want to do is let's take a look because this one's been on my mind for a while and it bugs me. Um, and it has nothing to do. Well, we'll talk about it. So here's the code review from last week, um, and it called out a very impressive thing here. It says that the button element has two class attributes, which is invalid HTML. I actually wanted to go change this, but I decided I would do it with everybody here. So if we take a look at our message component, it's 100% correct. I've got two classes on here. We don't need the clear class, so we're going to take that out. But for whatever reason, I didn't see that when we were working on it. Um, this was awesome that it called it out. It called it out with a high priority. It's 100% correct. Um, so this is the one I want to come back to. Um, that's that, and then the console log. Okay, so this is the last one, and this one comes down to the piece we added in the store, in the message store. Um, was it in the message store or was it in the hero store? So it is rightly calling me out. And I want to acknowledge what it's calling out. So after it got the class button correct, what it's saying is dispatching a message here introduces a side effect into a computed property. Computed properties should be pure functions derived from state and should not have side effects. This can lead to unexpected behavior, such as dispatching the same message multiple times if the computed property is reevaluated. This logic should be moved to the select hero method, which is the action that triggers the state change. I've added another comment on that method with a concrete suggestion, right? And so if we look, what it's done is it's basically copied the code um, to dispatch the message based on the hero ID. Um, it is not wrong. We are introducing a side effect here. This side effect could have adverse negative effects. And this is why we couldn't write to another signal inside of this computed, right? Because that's a side effect that has adverse negative effects. We talked about this a little bit by moving this into an event, which is what we're doing here with the dispatcher. We're creating a new event and firing that event from this computed. That we get away from some of the negative side effects that can happen here. This one weighed on me for a long time. And it still does weigh on me for a little bit even now, because The call out in the code review is not wrong. It's actually totally correct. Having a side effect here is potentially dangerous, which means that I'm presenting to you guys potentially dangerous code, which means I better have a pretty damn good reason why I'm doing it, right? Um, Otherwise, what I'm doing is I'm teaching people to do bad things. And so I want to call that out right now that this is potentially dangerous. And I spent a whole bunch of time thinking about it. What it's saying is that down here, when we update the hero name, we should move all of this stuff down there too. The problem is that now we've got to like copy a whole bunch of code, right? Well, really, we just copy this code, right? Well, we would copy this code down there. And there's another issue at play here. And it's in the select hero. So here in the select hero, we're patching the state with the selected hero ID, right? It's saying that we could get duplicate messages. This is actually wrong because of the way computed works. Computed looks to see if this has changed, right? So the computed looks, and it's like the selected hero ID. And the selected hero ID is what we're updating here. This could be bad if the selected hero ID was not a number or a string or something like that. If it was an object or an array, then it would be totally correct. This could fire multiple times for the same values. The reality is we aren't making any checks here on the selected hero ID. And the this will only fire when the selected hero ID changes. Well, the way it does it is through an equals check, a double equals check, I believe, because it wants, if it's an object, it wants to look up the object ID and not the actual object itself. Maybe it's a triple equals. I don't remember, but it's looking at a JavaScript ECMAScript level comparison. For numbers, because numbers are immutable, one always double equals and triple equals one, right? I think it's a triple equals compare. It will always triple equals itself. So this find won't be executed, which means this also won't be executed because the piece that we're depending on is an immutable piece of data. And this is where immutable state is really, really important, because if we make things immutable and we don't mutate objects and arrays and things like that, then these compares are very, very efficient and very, very accurate, as long as we use immutable state. Meaning that if we want to modify an array, we don't just push something into the array. We instead create a new array and return that array with the new value in it. With an object, we don't just mutate the object. We instead create a new object with the values changed. That's the way we treat our data as being immutable. When we treat our data as being immutable, then those equals compares are very, very accurate, because you get new object IDs for every mutation you make to the object or the array or whatever else, right? With immutable data like strings and numbers, we get other efficiencies because one always equals one, or test always equals test. Then the signals don't need to come in and do all of this stuff. So the dependency tree that the signal builds works up. Having side effects in computed is bad. Our side effect is launching another event, which is a side effect. So this is expected. And it has to do with the package that we're using that makes this okay. And that's the piece that I wanted to call out. Um, I rightly got scolded, and I should have been scolded for what I did, right? I need a good reason to do this, not just it's cool. And we can actually see um, how this works, right? If I click Windstorm here, um, notice here that it's saying Hero 1 is selected. If I click again and again and again and again, we got 9 messages saying that Hero 1 was selected. However, we only got the Windstorm was selected once. If we go here and then here, we got Dr. Nice and then Windstorm were selected. This is the reason that I chose to put this here. I'm relying on the dependency graph for the computed to only fire, right, to deduplicate a lot of the messages that we're getting on this click handler, right? If I just sit here and click Windstorm a bunch, we can see all of these click handlers happening. But again, that message is only in our log once. And that's why we're relying on a side effect. It is rightly calling it out as a side effect, but we also are using a message dispatcher, which communicates, I think, fairly well that we are a side effect. And then we're listening for that side effect, and we've got event handlers for that side effect. We aren't mutating data inside of this computer. We're actually waiting for the next update cycle and things like that, and that's why this works. So I did want to call that out, but I also wanted to talk today about code reviews and PRs. And one, I want to just point out that they're very important. Two, I want to point out to everybody, as you're doing code reviews, I really like what Johanderson said. Make it you and me, not me versus you, right? Be as cooperative as possible. And if the other side doesn't want to be cooperative, that's fine. That's on them. You be cooperative, and if they make the environment a bad place, then you could take it up with HR or other ways of handling that. Right? You shouldn't work with toxic situations, but from your point of view, be cooperative. Come into it as a team player. And then finally, there will be cases where things will just be wrong. And the way that you approach when things are wrong, be evidence-based, be trust-based, reach out to the person who may be wrong and ask to work with them, right? And when you're working with them, in the case of like a type guard, as they're like, well, you need to remove this. Like, well, this is a type guard that runs at runtime. I thought it would be safer than casting, because casting goes away as soon as the code is transpiled, but the type guard will always exist, or things like that, right? Still be assertive, but be cooperative. And I mean, the final thing is sometimes you just have to swallow your pride, document the decision, and move on. And if the decision comes back to bite you, you've got it documented in your PR, you've got it documented in emails, you've got it documented somewhere. Right? So sometimes you're forced to make decisions that you disagree with. Never dig in and be inflexible, right? You want to keep moving forward. But if for whatever reason you can't resolve an issue, document it and move on. That's my suggestion. Hey, you're back just in time for me to wrap everything up, and I'm over by half an hour. The void events thing is so good. I agree, Michael. Totally agree with that. I need to end. I'm gonna go. I'm not even sure what I'm doing today, but my body is telling me I need to get up and walk. I definitely need a drink. My throat is telling me you need a drink. It's been fun. There's been a lot of good things that I think we talked about today. As usual, feel free to follow me on Twitter. Feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. if you have comments or questions, feel free to reach out. Sometimes it takes me a day or two to get back. That's just the way my schedule is right now. But I do get back to people as they reach out. So thank you. Yeah, walk in water is a good idea. Totally agree. Yeah, my body's telling me you need to move, dude. So we're gonna go move. But thank you guys, everybody, for being here. We'll see you next time. It was good to see everybody, new friends and old friends, and everybody. Thank you for that. And we will.